Now, a lot of us feel embarrassed because we should be able to handle it. So we get uptight, we get sick, we fart, we belch, we get gurgling in the stomach in some instances because we sometimes hit saturation. Or sometimes we just plain hungry, or whatever it may be. We have to know what our saturation rate is. That's why normal people become ultra-saturated at a discussion or a lecture on neurology that runs an hour and a half. The average person, first of all, doesn't understand the language and doesn't even understand the significance. So they become saturated. All right, so I'll use another word, bored. Whenever, I'm using call now, whenever call bores me, this isn't true, it's just a thing to talk about. It just means that I'm not interested in the subject matter to the extent and the intent which call delivers it. Because call has flown 400 different types of airplanes, and when he meets me, he's always telling me about the landing gear problems of a Cessna 231. And I don't give that much of a shit about it. See, I am interested lightly. And then he calls me up at night. He says, let me tell you about the new Boeing. And I'm not that interested. So there's no such thing as a boring person. There are people that you are not interested in. There are people that discuss subject matter that doesn't faze you. In other words, if a behavioral engineer approaches you and he's telling you about all this new electronic gear, you're interested only up to a point. And that's what's so good about sometimes 60 Minutes or Nova, because they usually know how much to dish out before the people fall asleep on the air. They're just people, like I said before, doesn't understand that. Now I'll put it in another sense. Suppose I took a pin and I run it through your finger. But while I'm running the pin through the finger, I run a rusty corkscrew up your ass like that, a big one. But you don't feel the pin going through your finger. I'm exaggerating the condition here. Do you understand? In other words, if I put a Mack truck on your arm and let it hang from a precipice while somebody is piercing your ear, you don't seem to remember that. Right? Because there are orders of pain, and here's how it works. Destruction of art's church brings pain. That's maximum pain, see? Now, an atheist, it brings the maximum of pleasure, not the destruction of the church, but the surpassing of the values of the teachings of the church. So here you have a reverse scale system. So it's entirely possible for a person to have their legs sawed off or to walk into flames and not feel it. Now, the way you do that, let's assume you actually believed in Christ. You had no doubts about that kind of thing. And you knew by walking in the flame, you would be one with Christ. And the ecstasy, I don't know if you've ever seen religious ecstasy. It's a very rare thing. Ecstasy may be experienced by some artists in their artful expression, whether it be music, there's some kind of ecstasy achieved in that. You take the maximum ecstasy that a person can achieve, and walking into a flame, the ecstasy is in excess of the burn. Because your idea ahead is so great that the burn, let me tell you how it runs. Pain runs up to a certain point. And beyond that point, I better go back to this incident. I told you, some of you, about a man who slapped his child a great deal. It's the kid that broke the ship bottle in the bottle. The father would slap him without let up, continuously, like that. Not for, 2 minutes, like 20 minutes, but not knock his head over. Just constantly slap him. And the kid said to me that after a while, after about 20 slaps, it just felt very hot, no pain. Can you understand that? Is there anybody that doesn't understand that? You don't? All right. If I put your hand on a ball, it would sting. But after a while, like 500 times, assuming it wasn't doing it, you would feel very hot there, but no pain. Pain saturation occurs. You know what that means? The receptors of pain become fatigued. They've got to produce, the new chemicals produced to transfer the pain to the brain. So you saturate it and use it up. Let me put it your way. Those eyes shine a light at your eyes 100 times as bright as the illumination of this room. Do you ever do that? And then open your eye and look around. The room looks dark. Do you ever do that? Pull the flashlight against your eye for a while, and then cover the eye and look at the room. It goes down in key. It has a low level of illumination. Then it comes back bright again with this eye. You understand that? All right, now, see if you follow this example. This is a true case here, so is the other. In this case, they took an animal and they split the brain in half. So there was no transfer from the right to the left hemispheres of the brain. They split it and they used a kind of cellophane to divide the brain into two halves. Then they covered this eye of the animal. This is a drawing of a fictitious animal. Now, with this eye, this eye is covered. They expose this animal to this guy. And this guy always fed it and petted it and scratched its itch. Then they covered this eye and exposed the same guy to the animal. And this guy beat the animal, burnt it, and tortured it. Now, when you cover the left eye and it sees the tail wags and the dog comes over and licks his hand. And if you cover this eye, it snaps at the guy. Can you understand that? Is there anybody that doesn't understand that? If the brain is split, it learns about you through this eye in relation, and all that information goes into the brain. And when you cover this eye, there's a totally different reaction. There are people that have a split in their value system. They study science during the day and they go to church at night. Totally contradictory. And what they call, they say, is it possible to have a split personality? Is it possible to have a shattered personality? Where you have 60 different types of reactions depending on your background and investment in the background. The main bit then, in this kind of a system here, is what is pain to this dog and what is pleasure? In the learning system, this has been painful, and the second learning system to the covered eye, this has been pleasurable. If you expose both eyes, there's a very interesting type of dualistic feeling in the animal. There's a slow tail wag while the incisors are exposed, and a growl, and a slow tail wag. Can you understand that? And the dog swallows saliva and is between anger and joy. It's a very strange feeling, like laughter. The respiratory rate of laughter is very similar to weeping. There are people that have laughed themselves into tears. Do you ever see that? And there are people in a very sad situation that have cried and went into hysterical laughter. Have you ever seen that? Because the systems are so close to one another.
I laughed at my mother's funeral.
What type of laughter?
Well, it wasn't hilarious, but I guess I was so nervous or something, instead of crying, I just started laughing.
Were you crying at any time?
Yeah, part of the time I was crying, part of the time I was laughing.
Were you laughing out loud or yourself?
No, I was trying to hide it, but...
Oh, okay. Fine. Now, did you feel bad, wrong?
No, not too bad, because I'd been coming here about 10 years. But I was thinking that there must be a similarity in the two processes.
There is a similarity in laughter, and there's a similarity between love and hate. And I'm not talking about Freud now. I'm talking about the patterns, the extremes of the patterns, because a great amount of love can only be identified by, let me do it the old way, where I come around and I burn his wrist, burn it with a hot iron, then I burn his elbow, and I burn that area, and I burn all of you people here, then the other guy comes in and he just sticks a pin in it, he goes, fine, there comes the nice guy again. You see, there comes the nice guy again, depends on how much burning you receive. So love seems to be related to, if you lived in a very painful world, we identify with the person that is the least painful. And so love is transferred to that person. And then if we go to another area where the patterns are very different, it transfers to another person. Can you understand that? Or is that too far out for you? Okay. So if you don't understand then how it is that a person doesn't feel pain, it's just they put no order of significance to it. You have to practice that. It's not easy to do. We give things significance. And if you give something significance, you suffer. Any questions about any of that kind of subject?
Getting back to the guy in the beginning who got a lot of money and got out of his job and got out of the whole situation. Yeah. Take away his money. He has to go back to that same situation.
It's difficult then.
Right. He reaches saturation very quickly, which tends to mean that the situation makes the person more than the person makes the situation.
Yes.
Which might mean the best we can do, instead of really thinking about changing, is to avoid situations that are disastrous.
Yes. All right. But what didn't happen in the past is the area of the brain that was inhibited only went so far. And once the grandfather died, it went all the way and made all kinds of connections. It broke loose. See? And when it breaks loose, and the situation then reversed, your grandfather died, but he went down with the ship, and his fortune and all. See? So these pathways are already broken. It's extremely difficult to go back. Now you have the illusion that you're stuck with, and a very great disappointment in most people because of this breakthrough here. Do you know what kind of breakthrough I'm talking about? The freedom of the pathways. Okay. Any other questions about that? If you don't understand then why it is or how it is, what I tried to get across in this session tonight was how it is that people, even though they come to sessions, read a lot of books, don't always operate operationally, because the world is the prime effector. You got to remember that term. The prime effector is the world, the environment. And what you get out of books is secondary. It isn't a prime effector. You might read about fascinating things, but the real world still puts its burden upon your shoulder. In other words, no matter what kind of work you do, if you don't get reinforced for it, you can't afford the luxury of saying the man has been conditioned not to reinforce. That's Skinner would, because he always gets his paycheck. He could write about reinforcement. But if Skinner taught one day and he got a paycheck sometimes, then he was stiff on the end of the month. The school decided not to pay him on the end of the month. This is stiff, a guy that doesn't tip. Well, Skinner doesn't say he's a non-tipper, been conditioned not to tip. He can't pay his rent. He can't buy gas for the car. He has to call his daughter back from school. You're sending her to school. So you can't be a mechanist. I want you to understand that. No human being can be alive and breathing and walk into an area where there's toxic fumes and say, look, there's toxic fumes here. There's not a thing I can do about it, so I might as well breathe the toxic fumes, because it's painful and irritating, makes you hack and cough. The cough reflex is a result of the toxic fumes. You can't do that. We cannot be so rational as to set aside all things and be logical. Man is a being immersed in an environment.